but obviously this will be recorded as well, so people can check back later for the beginning. Hey, welcome to this month's Drought and Climate Outlook as part of the Pacific Northwest Drought Early Warning System. My name is John Stevenson. I work with the Climate Impacts Research Consortium, covering for Kathy Della, who was out on vacation this week. Amanda, do you mind going to the next slide here? I just want to do a quick overview, and then I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to give you a little bit of background on the DEWS, the Drought Early Warning System, and then we'll go into our speakers. Our first speaker will be Nick Bond with the Washington State Climate Office, giving us an update on current climate conditions. Catherine Roden from the National Weather Office in Spokane. We'll go ahead and talk a little bit about the immediate outlook, the next really month plus. And then we'll turn it over to the Climate Hub and hear from Gabrielle Rosh McNally to hear an update on what they have going. And I believe she'll be handing off Wolf's. It's going to talk a little bit about research they've been doing on megafires. And a couple of housekeeping notes. Phil Moat was supposed to be joining us and talk about some of his work and others have been doing on snow trends in the West. And unfortunately for us, fortunately for him, that work was just accepted by nature and has been embargoed. So we're actually not going to hear about it today, but we're hoping that we can hold his feet to the fire into the future and come back and talk to us about that work. In terms of questions, what I would ask is that each speaker will have about 10 minutes. If you have a question for them, go ahead and type that into your chat box. We'll try to take one written question after each speaker finishes. If you have other questions, please feel free to continue typing them in and we'll revisit them at the end of all of the speakers. And with that, I think we'll just go ahead and get started, and off to you, Amanda. Give us a little background.
Yeah. Thanks, John. As you said, my name is Amanda Sheffield, and I'm down at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego. But I'm one of the newer regional drought information coordinators for NIDIS, which is the National Integrated Drought Information System. And I specifically work with California and Nevada, but in the meantime, while we're still getting a new coordinator for the Pacific Northwest, I've been helping with these webinars. So what is NIDIS? Just to give a little background for those of you that may have not joined us before, NIDIS provides a better understanding of how and why drought affects society, the economy, and the environment. And we do this to improve accessibility, dissemination, and use of early warning information for drought risk management. And although we're working towards a national drought early warning system, we realize there's regional drought, very specific impacts and information needs in different regions. So we have a bunch of different regional drought early warning systems that we have launched in the region. These drought early warning systems work with the communities and that local expert network to build capacity for better decision making, thinking about observations and monitoring, predictions and forecasting, planning and preparedness, communication and outreach, and interdisciplinary research and applications. And what this looks like a lot of times is drought and risk assessments, drought and climate outlook forums or webinars like this, engaging the preparedness communities, building capacity around existing products, as well as test bedding those new products, and developing new and utilizing existing communication networks. The Pacific Northwest DEWS was officially launched in February of 2016, and since then we've been working on strategic plans for each of the drought early warning systems, including the Pacific Northwest. And if it's not available up yet, it will be soon on drought.gov. Will be our for the Pacific Northwest strategic plan. It provides a roadmap for moving forward the DEWS, and as well as identifying existing and new drought-related activities in the region. It's meant to be a living document, so it's not a stand-all document, but it's going to have a 2-year time frame, and it will be updated periodically with new priority areas or priority activities along the way. With that, I can go ahead and pass it on to the next speaker, which will be Nick, or John, if you want to introduce Nick real quick again.
Yeah, sure. Nick, your own slides. Do you want to run it yourself, or would you like us to?
Yeah, I think having Amanda run it would be fine. And
up there.
Yeah, and so I'll just kind of blast in here. This first photograph summarizes one aspect of the summer that will be remembered quite a while, right? Of course, the eclipse. And notice how dry the landscape is looking there, and more about that in a minute. Next slide. Another thing that we're going to remember about this summer is smoke, and especially in the populated regions west of the Cascades. This is a MODIS image from earlier this month during a heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, and BC was the source of this smoke. We're getting some in Western Washington again from a fire in Eastern Washington right now, but that's it's been kind of remarkable how much we've had. So next slide. I'd just like to start off with the most recent drought monitor for the West, and what immediately comes to eye there is the D4 and D3 in the eastern part of Montana. That isn't technically the Northwest, I guess, but you can see Montana is the place that's really being impacted the most here of the kind of western states. There has been the emergence of some DO regions in basically much of Washington and Oregon, and that's related to this remarkably warm and dry summer that we've been having. And it would, I'm sure it'd be even worse if we hadn't had such a wet and snowy winter. So next slide. With regards to the dryness, this is of course a dry time of year anyway, but how dry it's been has been remarkable, with some places basically no rain in the last couple of months. Here, this slide is the percent of normal precipitation from the end of June into last week, and can see lots of places less than 5% of the normal precipitation. Next one. Similar sort of look at temperature across the Northwest, where much of the region, especially Washington and Oregon, is greater than 2 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, with some patches 4 and even higher degrees above normal, again for the last couple of months. The Northern Rockies not quite as hot. If we go to the next slide, comparing that with the kind of remarkable summer of 2015, actually it's a different scale and all that, but the temperatures in July and August in 2015 weren't actually that much different than they have been this year. What was really noteworthy in 2015 was just how hot it was in June, and June 2017 doesn't compare to June 2015. So in some sense, it hasn't been as bad as it was a couple of years ago. Okay, next slide. Just kind of a different perspective there, just looking at the day-to-day temperatures here. I use Portland, Oregon, and can see there it's from basically the start of July through the middle of last week. See a lot of days above normal, of course, with a couple of records for the day set. The minimum temperatures mostly above normal, but hovering near the normal range. Similar slides for Seattle show that almost every day the minimum temperatures were above normal. So we're definitely seeing that in Washington State, where our summer minimum temperatures are consistently above normal. All right, next slide. Why was it so warm and dry? Well, it was, we had a big old fat ridge sitting over us aloft. This is a 500 millibar anomaly map, geopotential height anomaly map for the same period of those temperature and precip maps that I showed. Again, the reds showing much higher heights than normal over the Pacific Northwest. If you isolate a box, basically a 5 by 5 degree box at the mouth of the Columbia River, as shown in the next slide, and look at the time series of that for July and August combined, going back the basic INSEP reanalysis to the 1950, can see in the last few decades, of course, an upward trend there. And just for that region right at the mouth of the Columbia, it looks like this last couple of months are record high heights. And so again, that ridge has just meant that much more sinking motion and well, made us hot and dry. So next slide, please. Stream flows. This is a map from the middle of last week showing in from a percentile point of view what the stream flows were across the Pacific Northwest, with the greens being basically in the normal range. See a lot of greens there, a few blues that were above normal, a few reds much below normal, but the stream flows have been kind of hanging tough, at least on the medium-sized rivers, presumably because it was such a wet and a winter and snowy in the mountains. I don't know how much this kind of near normal flows has to do with the groundwater being, fully charged, and how much is just due to it. We normally don't get much rain in the summertime, but at least at any rate, for most of the rivers, in pretty good shape. Next slide. I want to get back to smoke. And here, this is a time series for a Seattle station of PM 2.5, showing that during the heat wave at the end of July into August, periods of elevated PM 2.5 concentrations. When you get above 80 or so, it gets pretty bad. And you can see that. That little dip in the middle there, the smoke was more aloft. So we thought this was pretty bad. But if you go to the next slide, I repeat that same trace on the bottom there in purple, and then a site, Wenatchee, on the east side of the Washington Cascade, showing that there is really bad, with one day getting into the 300 micrograms per meter cube, which is just nuts in terms of how much. And you can see for days on end, there was very elevated concentrations there. All right, next slide. Just a couple more to go. Knowing me, I can't, I gotta have an SST anomaly map in there. And this shows for the whole world's oceans as of last week, that a little bit cooler than normal in the tropical Pacific. Perhaps Catherine's going to be talking about this. Virtually all of the North Pacific that has brought cooler water from depths along the coast. And so while most of the North Pacific is warm, it has been cool there. And I'm not sure of all the consequences there, but it could have some impacts on the ecosystem in terms of bringing up low oxygen water for the crab and rockfish and so forth. And so if we could get the next, there's the slide. So this shows the daily winds and the oceanographic convention there at Newport, Oregon, showing with a couple of minor interruptions. They've been mostly from the north along the Oregon coast. And with that, I'll close, and I guess if there are any questions, can maybe take one right now, but at the end, I think we're going to mostly have our discussion. Thank you.
That sounds great. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, and I don't see any questions in the question box at the moment, but for those of you who came on a little bit after my introduction, we're going to try to take one question after each presentation. If you have them, please just type them into the question box, and I'll go ahead and just take the first one off of that. And with that, on to you, Catherine.
Okay, hi, I'm Catherine Rowden. I'm the hydrologist for the National Weather Service out of Spokane. Not a meteorologist or climate scientist, so just want to put that out there. So going to go over the near-term outlook, long-range outlook, what we're looking at for the ENSO predictions for the winter, and a little bit of an anecdote that we've been looking at. So to start with, it's hot, we all know that. And Monday's high temp forecast, this is the forecast for today. I pulled it yesterday, so it might be slightly altered now, but there are the normal temps that we would expect for today. So anywhere from 8 to 16 degrees above average for where we're sitting right now for temperatures. And for the 6 to 10 day outlook, we are expecting some cooling this week, but then warming back up. And the climate outlooks have this above average temperature trend continuing. 80% chance of above average temperatures continuing along the west coast into Washington, Idaho. And then for the precip, that dry signal, the dry signal is still continuing with the biggest odds of below average precip bullseye over eastern Montana, which is not great for them in their drought condition right now. And then the 7-day precip forecast, just to show what we've been seeing, 0 for Seattle, Spokane, Portland, greater chances of some precip over Montana and Idaho, but on the order of maybe 100th to a 10th. And Seattle did, I believe, set its record for days without measurable precip this summer, and Spokane is still going towards their record. I think right now we're at 60 plus days without measurable precip, and our record is 73, set in 1917, I believe. So could still be breaking more of those records this summer. And then beyond the 6 to 10 day outlook, it's pretty similar again. So the bullseye now for the above average temps, still mostly Oregon, Washington, Idaho. That below average precip odds now extends through the Pacific Northwest. And then looking out even further for the whole month of September, not a lot of difference here again. Still increased odds of above average temperatures. This time the bullseye is over eastern Washington, northwest Montana, and Idaho. So it just kind of keeps going and going and going. So for the 3-month outlook, September, October, November, I'm kind of becoming a broken record, but it continues on. Increased odds through November. And I'm just going to go through these 3-month outlooks through the winter one by one. So the one you're seeing is September through November, and then October through December, November through January looks the same, December through February, January through March, February through April, and to save you the suspense, these look the same all the way through, I think, November of 2018. So what all the models are suggesting right now and all their number crunching is that we have increased odds of above average temperatures through 2018. So for the precip, however, here's the 3-month September through November precip outlook. There's no signal right now over the Pacific Northwest, so it's equal chances right now of above, below, or at average precip. So, and I only put one slide in here because that's also the same. At least through next spring, there's really no signal one way or the other for the precipitation. For the winter, for ENSO, right now, this is the bar chart, the probabilistic forecast. Those green bars are the probability of neutral. And in that black box are kind of October through March, kind of our winter period. Blue is chances of La Niña, red is chances of El Niño. So right now, definitely neutral is dominating for what we might be looking at for the winter. Greater than a 50% chance right now we'll have a neutral winter. And sorry, this is the early August forecast. I forgot to mention that. And then this is the mid-August forecast. Trending pretty in line with what the last forecast was, so it's a good chance of neutral winter. The edge of a El Nino or La Nina, big strong event, they're all kind of hug in the middle, which is, again, suggests a pretty good chance of neutral. And I'm glad Nick showed that SST plot because I'm not showing it. So thanks for doing that, Nick. And so just for those that are interested, here's the composite temp and precip some past neutral winters since 1980. So temperature, actually in the Pacific Northwest, it tends to be cooler than average, which is completely opposite of what I just showed you for the outlook. And for precip, there's some variability, but for a wide area, it has tended to be above average precip. But I'll show you why there is some chance for above average temps besides, you know, the other factors that go in besides. And so there have been a lot of neutral winters in these black boxes since the 80s that have been somewhere above average temps in the Pacific Northwest. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. And then as a hydrologist, I'm always interested in what that means for water in the winter, flooding, drought in the summer, etc. And this is the chart some of you probably are used to seeing from the Northwest River Forecast Center that shows the April through September runoff volume, which is usually the critical period for water that we're all worried about. So on the left-hand side, this is volume, and I just grabbed the Clark Fork at Cabinet Gorge Dam, which is part of the Pend Oreille River system. It drains off the Western Rocky Mountains in Montana. And then the volumes are separated into the ENSO category. So on the left, you have La Niña, the middle, neutral, the right, El Nino, and then those little dots are the years. So like right up at the top, 1997 was a neutral year, and it was their highest volume on record for that location. So this trend shows La Niña winters definitely tend to have more water, El Nino less, or the summer following these winters. And the thing with neutral that we've seen is there just tends to be more variability, but certainly the trend for the likelihood of having a very low water year after a neutral winter in most basins is less than if we were coming out of an El Nino winter. And I checked a few spots. I'm definitely more familiar with the inland Northwest kind of watersheds, but I did check some other spots, you know, on the coastal basins, and it's similar trends across the area that I saw. And then just because it's been an interesting summer, and we had an interesting summer a couple of summers ago, I just wanted to throw this out here. So I looked at the Spokane station, and our period of record goes back to 1881. So in 2015, our June through Friday, last Friday, which I pulled these numbers, was our driest period on record for that time period. And this summer we had more rain, but we're still 7th driest. But most of that rain fell in one day in early June. So, and I'm playing with the numbers, I know, but you take that one day out and you look at the June 16th through current, and now 2017 is tied with 2015 for the driest. And the interesting thing to me, again, as a hydrologist for the water year, is 2015 was a pretty dry winter if you looked at the water year precip. It was in the bottom 20%, but 2017 is right now the second wettest water year. Even though we have one of our driest summers on record so far, we're still in second place for the wettest. So Nick showed you the stream flows. That water is still working its way through the system. I got a call from somebody a couple weeks ago that's still dealing with groundwater flooding on their property. And then for temperatures, another interesting one. So far this summer, 2015 ranks as the hottest. 2017 is just a shade below that and is right now tied for second place, a three-way tie. And as Nick mentioned about the smoke, this is the image from August 4th, satellite image. That was right in the midst of that heat wave that was coming that really tamped our temperatures down. So that average temp for 2017 would be higher right now if it weren't for the smoke that we've had this summer. And we're also not done. So I just thought that was pretty interesting that 2015 was a pretty extreme year, and we have another one now in 2017, at least at that station. So that's about all I have, just continuation of increased odds of above average temperatures, below average precip in the near term, but no strong signal in the long term. And then looks like we could be heading into a neutral winter. And that's all I have for now. And if there's a question now, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'll wait to the end.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. I don't see any questions in the box at this moment, but certainly if any of the other panelists have questions, we have a little bit of time. Any others? Okay. Well, hearing none, Gabrielle, I think you're up next. Are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Thanks so much, John. Just making sure my screen was showing all right. So, well, thanks, folks, for joining today. I thought I would just give a little background. I think now the folks who have been joining this webinar are a little bit more aware of the Climate Hub, so I thought I'd just give you a little bit background about us, but we wanted to save plenty of time. We tend to bring in a guest speaker to talk about relevant issues. We're going to be talking about fire, which I think goes well with our previous presentations, but just a little more on the Climate Hub. So we were really created to provide information and tools so managers, farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners, and those who advise and work with them can reduce weather and climate-related risks, particularly by incorporating science-based climate change information in their decision-making. So on our website, that's the national website, and then you can dig into the regional website. You can find regional climate and vulnerability assessments, educational materials, blogs, papers, and webinars, and plenty of tools and data visualizations. Our website is under construction right now. It's going to be pretty wonderful when it's finished, but just be aware that things are moving around and changing. So it's maybe not the best time to check out our website, but keep it on your radar. It's going to be great in another month or so. We'll see. These things always change the deadlines. And then just to kind of note, we've contributed to the 4th National Climate Assessment, been participating in that process. We've also funded nearly 12, or a total of 12 projects for this upcoming fiscal year. And they're ranging from soil health to specialty crops, dryland farming, rangeland health, and climate impacts to yellow cedar. So a lot of exciting and really diverse kinds of efforts. So I think that this has already been kind of covered. I just wanted to show folks another resource that I thought might be interesting. So this NC Web, which I'm showing a page of for the Chetco Bar Fire, which I got last week, so that's not updated as of today. But this website is an interagency all-risk incident information management system, and it was really kind of developed with 2 missions: to provide the public a single source of incident-related information, and then sort of a standardized reporting tool for public affairs. So I encourage folks, you can look, that's actually national, but there's a lot of activity in our region right now. So lots of good up-to-date information. And then I also thought I would point out on the website, there are a couple blogs in Oregon and Washington to look at smoke information and really to kind of get us thinking about human health impacts. And I think they're nice resources and ties in well with the presentation or the slides earlier. So for those who are kind of thinking and tracking those things, it's definitely there's been some major impacts to our air quality in the region. And certainly there are folks who that impacts more than others. So finally, I would like to welcome Sarah Rolfs from the Era of Megafires Project, which is a partnership between the U.S. Forest Service. And we've had a lot of great contributions from Dr. Paul Hesberg and Dr. Dave Peterson, who are Forest Service scientists, and they've worked with North 40 Productions. Sarah, I'm sure will tell you more about it. She's a project coordinator and has been making a significant impact on regional and local issues throughout Central Washington for over a decade. Fueled by her passions for education and forest health, Sarah connects the Era of Megafires with interested communities and makes sure they have everything they need to put on their own successful events. And she's also a forest landowner. And if you dig into the website here, she tells a little bit about her story as well. So I'm going to pass it off to Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. Full disclosure is I am not a scientist. That's Dr. Paul Hesberg from the Forest Service, but he's off playing hooky doing research in the Bob Marshall this month. So I'm kind of pinch hitting for him. But the Era of Megafires, just a little bit of background, is as mentioned, it's a collaboration between the Forest Service and then a private nonprofit called the Wildfire Project. And we've been collaborating on providing educational presentations to communities throughout the Pacific Northwest. We've been and actually we've gone up to BC earlier in June, and we've hit Montana. We're headed to Utah this fall. And actually we just got confirmed that we're going to head out to DC and present at the WO for the Forest Service in conjunction with WRI. The intent of it is to provide education on the issues surrounding wildfires and megafires in particular, climate change, of course, being one of them. And as mentioned before, smoke gets to be a big issue as far as regulation. When you have a wildfire, there's no way to actually really regulate it. So then we don't get to do the prescribed burns, which is actually less harmful to us humans and, across the board to animals as well, because of the particulates that are burning. So I guess I'll show you, we have a chapter in our presentation that's called Climate Change. and it does interview Peterson, and it gives a little bit of information from his research. And then, field any questions, but we'll go from there. So can you cue the video, please?
So of course we know that when we have hotter and drier weather, we're going to get more fire. So that's not rocket science. But what we're seeing is a potentially permanent change in our weather patterns to drier summers, longer fire seasons, and just having fire become a more prominent player across the landscape. When I sit down at my desk and I actually look at the data, it kind of hits me in the face. There are some things changing very quickly. We have about 100 years of fire history data in the western United States. And it's very easy to develop a statistical relationship between climate and fire occurrence. When we project those relationships into the future, by about mid-century, we end up getting 2 to 3 times more fire per year in eastern Washington and in other areas around the Intermountain West where dry forests exist. That's a tremendous change ecologically, and it's going to be a tremendous change also in terms of the impacts on human communities. So we're going to have a long adjustment as we go through this period of increased fire. And the main thing that we need to be aware of is a lot of our forests have not experienced fire for many decades. That means we have a lot of fuel buildup, and that means when fires do occur, they're going to be intense, they're going to be crown fires, and they'll probably cover a lot of area because it's very difficult to suppress those kinds of fires. At some point later in the 21st century, we may catch up with what I call the fire debt. But at least in the near term, we can probably expect to have a lot more of these high-intensity, large fires. We need a shift in attitude from the concept of resisting fire to living with fire, because it is part of our environment.
So some of those slides that you saw on there with the heavy smoke, that's from Wenatchee, which is our hometown. And there was the graph that I actually took a screenshot of earlier to show how awful that smoke really gets. We get the inversion, much like you'll see in Missoula. So the smoke just gets socked into our valley. The one thing that I know that Dr. Hesberg has been discovering with some of his colleagues is the wind is really starting to play a big role, partly because of these mega fires creating their own weather, as we've experienced seeing with getting all that smoke down from BC and from the Diamond Creek fire and now Jolly Mountain. I don't know if there's any specific questions about what we showed. I mean, the one thing that Hesberg really tries to drive home is where the McMurray fire is there, we're north central Washington here in Wenatchee, and Fort McMurray is halfway between us and the Arctic Circle. And they had their largest fire start in May, which is pretty astounding when you think about how far north they are and what their temperature should be. So I guess that's about all I have if there aren't any questions.
Great. Well, thanks, Sarah and Gabrielle. Are there any questions out there right now for Sarah or really any of the other panelists? Seeing none. Well, feel free to type those in. Sarah, I did have a question. I mean, so what is your group doing in terms of, I mean, I guess is there a component to this work, and what does that look like?
I'm sorry, you cut out when the what kind of component?
Oh, an engagement, kind of an outreach engagement component.
Yeah, so we've been to over 70 cities throughout the Pacific Northwest and BC. And so what we do is we go into a community, and by and large, someone will contact me, and because I'm the organizer, and we go into the community and we provide, Dr. Hesberg does a presentation called the Era Megafires. It's just under an hour now. And then there's Q&A, and we usually really encourage the hosting organization to invite local community experts so that they can talk about the local issues. Specifically, and the goal that we have is to educate the general population so that they can participate in the conversation about fires. You know, it's becoming such a part of our life here in the Pacific Northwest in particular. And so then, in turn, we can talk to our policymakers. You know, our previous public lands commissioner up here in Washington stated at a summit we had, he said, you know, I get calls about people complaining about prescribed burn fires. I've never heard anybody call and say, hey, thanks for doing that, because it's going to prevent us from having a catastrophic wildfire. And so as a politician trying to get reelected, you know, they listen to their constituents. And so we're trying to educate people on what that looks like, and that actually prescribed burn, it's planned, and yeah, some of them get away, but that's only about 1 or 2%. And would you rather know that you can't go hiking on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week because of a prescribed burn, or would you rather get socked in for 30 days? Yes, we're doing outreach. We had a fall tour and we had a spring tour, and we're kicking off our fall tour this September 8th in Roslyn, Washington. We do have some Oregon dates and some Idaho dates, and actually out to Montana again. So as mentioned before by Gabrielle, we have a website. Actually, we have a new one we kicked off. It's called the Era of Megafires. So if you just Google search Era of Megafires, you'll be able to see the tour schedule. And then we're also, it looks like we're rolling into spring as well.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah, so very significant engagement component. Well, you know, certainly at CERC, we're happy to help share some of those dates. Gabrielle or Sarah, if you want to send us some of those, we're happy to push them through and help make them available.
Okay.
Great. Well, were there any other questions out there lingering on people's minds before we wrap up? We're certainly well ahead of schedule. We have plenty of time scheduled for the remaining of the webinar. So
it looks like there's two types of questions, John.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't see those, so.
Okay. Sorry, I can read them off then.
Man, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. The indicators of drought shown don't seem to explain what we are seeing along the Oregon coast, as indicated by the Chechco Bar Fire. However, the 30-day eddy assessment is pretty intriguing. Does the Northwest DEWS look at eddy when assessing drought conditions?
Well, Nick, do you want to take a stab at that one, or Catherine?
Yeah.
I could. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, Catherine, I was going to hope that you could address that one.
Sure. Yeah, we kind of look at a lot of different factors, and sometimes that one comes into play. You know, the drought categories for D0, D1, et cetera, are pretty specific, and it's been really challenging over the last few years to figure out how fire factors into that, because, you know, for instance, we had a really wet winter, so there's not a real hit on reservoirs in a lot of areas. Stream flows are great, but it's been so hot and dry, there's fires. So there's no easy answer. Yes, it's looked at, but it's not the only factor, and we can't just make a drought designation based on one specific parameter. I hope that answers the question.
For those of you that don't know, eddy is the evaporative demand drought index. It's one of probably 50 to 60 different indices now that go into the U.S. drought monitor categories. Okay, the next question is, what are the smoke impacts in Southwest Oregon? They seem to be surrounded by fires, and reports I'm getting from Medford indicate it's pretty bad down there and has been for a while.
Who wants to take a stab at that one?
Can you repeat the question again?
Sorry. What are the smoke impacts in Southwest Oregon? They seem to be surrounded by fires, and reports I'm getting from Medford indicate it's pretty bad down there and has been for a while. So smoke impacts on Southwest Oregon?
Yeah, I can't
Yes.
speak to that. I don't know if anyone else.
Yeah, this is John. Unfortunately, this would be great to have Kathy in here because she's so well connected to a lot of the other offices throughout the state. You know, I think that's true. If you look at the Medford area, it's not just the Chetco Bar fire burning to its west, but it's also a number of smaller fires burning to the east in the Cascades as well. So they really are fairly encircled there. NASA has some great imagery I've been using on a personal note when I'm trying to plan some trips. I really encourage people to go check that out as well. If you Googled NASA fire and smoke, you should come up with some of the satellite imagery they have of smoke, and it's fairly real time. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. And as you know, I mean, the smoke impacts are highly dependent on the existing winds at the moment. So one day it can be quite bad, and of course, if things shift, they can blow that out into somebody else as well.
And the website that I had, oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in to say the website that the OregonSmoke.blogspot.com, that's the website that I shared, and they have actually Medford an unhealthy circle over it right now. And I know that that's been holding pretty steady much of at least the fire season in Oregon. But you actually look, air quality in most of sort of southern Oregon is not great, especially west of the Cascades. So if you go to that website, it's nice. It goes all the way through from good, moderate, unhealthy for certain groups, and then unhealthy for everyone, very unhealthy, and then hazardous. And they update this regularly. So there's a few spots that are hazardous right now in some parts of, I think, closer to some of the fires that are going on. So anyways, it's a good website, and Washington has one as well. I wasn't able to find one for Idaho, but I didn't look super hard, but I think these are really helpful for those planning, personal or just keeping track of what's going on. So that's OregonSmoke.blogspot.com. And then there's a wasmoke.blogspot.com as well. So, and there's a lot of details on the website.
One thing I should add is that in terms of the actual health impacts and how many emergency room visits and that sort of thing, that sort of data is usually not available in real time. And so we, as far as I know, I don't know where if it's even possible to get the statistics on, what the human health impacts have been so far, but I'd have to expect that there have been some significant issues for some folks, especially with chronic, pulmonary problems and so forth.
I know the Department of Health, Oregon Department of Health is really fantastic. They actually they have a whole group who's looking at climate impacts, but also obviously are thinking about things like smoke and other weather impacts or associated weather impacts to human health. And so I won't try to pull it up here, but I know if you go to Oregon Public Health or the Oregon Health Authority, you might even, for folks on the line, might call somebody there to get those statistics. I don't know how regularly, but they do track those kinds of things. And I believe Washington State, their health department does the same. So those are two resources. Again, I don't know how often those are published, but I think they do need to make them available in public if people ask for them. And there's been a big, because of some of the work with the National Climate Assessment, there's been greater attention paid to what are going to be the health effects if we continue to have these kinds of smoke and fire prevalence moving forward in the future. So I know there's increased interest to do more research on those things and making linkages, but yeah, State Department of Health is a good place to start, at least for those interested.
Great. Thanks, Nick and Gabrielle. Let's see, Amanda, are there any other questions there?
There's a quick, I think this might be a follow-on comment to what you guys were just talking about. Someone wrote, in Oregon, we can get emergency department visits in 24-hour increments. Best contact is Meredith Jagger at the Oregon Health Authority. I think that was a response to the discussion. So otherwise, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists, not only for great information, but also presenting it in a timely fashion. And I think if you have other specific questions, you can certainly email me. Amanda, perhaps you would also be willing to receive emails for follow-up questions for any of the panelists you can pass along.
Yep.
Great. And with that, I'll hand it back to you to wrap us up and talk about when our next webinar is going to take place.
Yeah, thanks, John. And thank you also to all the speakers. We wouldn't be able to do these sort of things without the regional experts in the region. And so it's great to have everyone presenting and take turns and give out their information of their groups and organizations and research projects. The next webinar is scheduled for October 23rd at 11 a.m. You can already go to register either at the link there or visit drought.gov. All the recording and webinar slides and other materials from today will be uploaded to drought.gov in the next few days. So if you want to check back or share this with others, you can go ahead and see there. And if there are, as John said, if there's any more questions, feel free to contact us. Otherwise, we'll hear from you next time.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks all.